Horizon Chance, reaction. This is Hitler Oversimplified Part 2 by the channel Oversimplified. Yeah. First of all, Oversimplified channel, when it comes to the content copyright issue, it's a bit weird, right? Usually when some channel has a copyright issue, it immediately shows up. With Oversimplified, it's weird. Whenever some video has a copyright issue, it usually shows up after a day or two. So I thought the original Hitler video is not going to have any copyright issue, but it did. So I had to blur it from YouTube, and which is a bit more weird than the checkered box I usually use. So I'm going to use checkered box here basically. So if it's too much of an issue to anyone, use the original video side by side, I guess, because I can't have any copyright, content issue, because, last year, even if it's not blocked, it's just a copyright claim. What I found out is when I try to monetize my channel, just because I had few copyright, content claims here and there, I wasn't getting monetized. As soon as I remove them, YouTube eventually monetized my channel. So I can't take risk on that front. So if checkered box is much of an issue, I guess, like I said, run original video. There's a link in the description. Run original video side by side. So let's watch one. I love this Hitler series. I love how there's a more psychological layer to how Hitler was growing up and the detail about that. So yeah, let's watch this one.
Since Germany's military had to be reduced, Hitler could no longer remain a soldier after the war, but he kept working for the army as an informant. After the war, communists in Germany had attempted a revolution, and the government was worried about communism in general. So Hitler was tasked with infiltrating and reporting on any new political parties that could pose a communist threat. A new party called the German Workers' Party threw up a whole bunch of red flags, so Hitler went along to one of their meetings, but found that they weren't communist at all. They were extreme right and shared many of his extreme beliefs, so he left the army and signed up to join the party. His fantastic speaking abilities impressed the party's leadership and supporters, and he very quickly rose to the top. He decided the party needed a makeover, so he renamed it to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or
yeah, this is like somebody from some law enforcement sends some criminal as an undercover agent because he's a criminal. It blends just right in, right? But it's obvious thing that he's a criminal will probably like the thing that the party that he's basically investigating, and will join the criminal organization. This is what happened here basically. They send the guy with the radical ideas to find radical idea parties. He just liked it and he just hanged around.
Nazi for short, and he gave it a new color scheme. The Nazis weren't very specific on policy, but Hitler made extravagant promises to return Germany to its former glory by undoing the Treaty of Versailles and reuniting all ethnic Germans into one nation. He also said that only pure Aryan people should be allowed to be citizens, and that all Jews would lose their citizenship. These ideas were already common in extreme right politics, but what set the Nazis apart was Hitler himself, and they quickly became the leading party on the extreme right. Many of the political parties in Germany at the time had paramilitary wings, and the Nazis were no different. Hitler set up the very descriptive whole protection detachment, later changed to the...
Yeah, so basically I think what happened there was all this basically, all the parties were kind of similar. But Nazis were, way too, I guess, over the top, because Hitler always just went into the meeting and just started screaming, like how we saw that original videos. Every time he gave a speech and just screams his lungs out, basically. And while every other party is just, in the background, just talking with each other. And there's that guy giving speeches loudly. So like, oh, that's our guy, I guess.
Very delightful Gymnastic and Sports Division, and finally settling on the ominous Storm Detachment, or SA for short. Their job was to defend Nazi party meetings and intimidate political opponents, and they would frequently engage in battles with communists on the streets. Since the Allies had demanded a reduction in Germany's military size, many trained soldiers were left unemployed. They liked the Nazi ideology, and it was only natural for them to join the SA, which grew larger and larger over time. The new democratic government that formed after World War I was pretty weak and ineffective. In order to pay reparations to the Allies, it started printing more money. The problem is that printing money doesn't actually give a country more money, it just makes money less valuable. So as the country printed more and more money, it became worth less and less, and the currency crashed. In 1919, $1 US was worth about 4 German marks. By December 1923, $1 US was equal to 4.2 trillion marks. The price of bread rose to 200 billion.
4.2 trillion!
Banknotes became worthless. Unsurprisingly, in such an economic crisis, Germany struggled to pay the Allies. The French were pissed about this, so they occupied the Ruhr, an area full of factories, and took the economic output from the area as payment. They treated the German civilians badly, and in total, approximately 130 Germans were killed during the occupation. Germans were furious, and Hitler and the Nazis thought that now would be a great time to lead a revolution. In November 1923, inspired by something a certain bold Italian man did a year earlier, Hitler stormed a meeting at a beer hall and called for an uprising against the government. With his supporters, he marched on the streets of Munich, hoping the police would join his side. They did not. Hitler was put on trial for treason. He could have been...
Imagine Hitler was at the start of the rally, obviously. I mean, that was he was basically leading it. Imagine if those all the policemen who shot the shot, Hitler would have died just then. Whole thing would have stopped. If not stopped, the whole thing would have been not as intensive as it was. World War II probably could have avoided, right? There would have been, uprising here and there. People just, some kind of war would have happened because people were, pissed off basically in Germany because of all the things were happening because of Treaty of Versailles. But maybe the way World War II went on, and it wouldn't have taken place like that. Most people forget that Hitler was one of the key person, right? Who was really important into the way how World War II, ended up. Lots of people think Hitler was not that important. Even without Hitler, the idea would have been still there and war would have been still like that. No, Hitler was pretty damn important. Without him, there would have been a war, but not at the scale what it was.
Sentenced to life, but the right-wing judges thought he was a pretty cool guy. Hitler knew the judges and knew that they would be lenient, so he took the opportunity to make impassioned speeches during the trial. And in the end, he was sentenced to just 5 years in prison, of which he only served 9 months. And when I say prison, it was more like a pleasant hotel stay where he had plenty of time to write a book. The whole affair was covered by the media nationwide, and it made Hitler famous. Hitler and his extreme message were now known throughout Germany, but the everyday German still didn't care.
See, that's the thing. Because of Treaty of Versailles and how people were basically demanding money, France and everybody, because of World War I and how things happened. And the Treaty of Versailles was so strong that every single German basically hated that, right? All the things were happening, the inflation and all that. So if a guy comes around and just say like, this is bullshit, we are German, we are better than this, we have to do something about this and that, everyone in the country basically is going to like that. So Hitler was pretty liked, right? All the way to the start of World War II, start of the, basically invasion of Poland. Then the people who believed in Nazis stayed there, and the people who didn't and thought this is going a bit extreme just, shut their mouth, I guess, because what are they going to say? They're going to say something against Hitler? Come on.
Much for him. In the 1928 election, the Nazis only won about 2% of the vote. Many were still intimidated by all the violence and the shouting and how unpolitician-like he was. But a new economic crisis would change all of that. To help Germany pay its reparations, America agreed to give it loans. In October 1929, the Wall Street crash happened, and America wanted its money back. The economic strain this put on an already struggling Germany was severe. Unemployment skyrocketed, poverty was widespread, and Germans were sick of it. It was clear that the newly formed democracy wasn't working. In the face of crisis, Germans began moving to the political extremes. If you were German and wanted change, your choices now were either the communists or the Nazis. Hitler claimed that he was the only one who could return Germany to its former glory. The Nazi Party used propaganda to make Hitler seem like a great and powerful man, and they gave the German people a scapegoat to blame for all their suffering. The promise of a single strong dictator was a breath of fresh air for Germans after years of failing democracy. Some bought into his extreme ideology. Some didn't agree with the racism, but were willing to vote for him anyway. Many didn't know much about politics at all, but just got caught up in the hype. Election after election, the Nazis became more and more popular, until in 1932, they became the biggest party in the German parliament. Hitler came to truly believe that he was some sort of great, destined savior of Germany. He turned megalomaniac. He decided to run for president, and did surprisingly well, but still lost to the extremely popular World War I general, Paul von Hindenburg. Since he was now the leader of the biggest party though, he demanded President...
Yeah, so basically around that time what happened was lots of people, were like, yeah, all the things that Hitler is saying is right, and also about the Jews. But there are some guys who's like, okay, I don't agree with everything he's saying, but I feel like he's the guy we needed. Like the same thing that happened during the Trump presidency. Like, they are criminal, they are rapists. I believe some of them are... No, you know what? No, none of them are nice. They're Jews, basically. That's what the Hitler's message was. Everybody like, yeah, I guess I'm going to ignore that Jew part. But I guess what he's saying is at least true. Like, we are in a bad situation. Maybe he can make changes. So people still voted for him, but still, he didn't get enough vote.
Hindenburg make him chancellor. but Hindenburg was reluctant, seeing that Hitler was clearly such a big racist. Industry leaders urged Hindenburg to give Hitler the chancellorship, fearing the rising support for communism, and leader of the Center Party von Papen, who had been secretly negotiating with Hitler, said to Hindenburg, "How about we make Hitler chancellor on the condition that I get to be vice-chancellor and most government jobs go to us moderate conservatives? That way, I'll get to keep my power, we'll get to keep our power and we'll control Hitler like he's our angry little puppet." What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything. Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, but he was not yet a dictator. In February,
That photo
Hitler
is just
became Chancellor of
ominous,
Germany.
right? There, he's just like shaking hands, bowing down. You have no idea what I'm going to do. That's what he's thinking right now. This is just first step.
In January 1933, but he was not yet a dictator. In February, the German parliament building was set on fire. Historians still aren't sure who did it, and many suspect the Nazis did it themselves, but Hitler blamed the communists, and he convinced President Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree allowing him
It was definitely Hitler, right? He needed that to blame the communists and set his plan, basically.
to imprison all communists and other political opponents. Communists and others were sent off to the first concentration camp in Dachau. At this time, the elderly President Hindenburg passed away, giving Hitler the perfect opportunity. He introduced a law to parliament that would allow him to make all future laws and decisions entirely on his own. With his political opponents imprisoned and the SA intimidating others, Hitler's law passed. Just 2 months after becoming chancellor, Hitler was now a dictator. He still had one problem. The leader of the SA wanted the SA to take over the job of the regular German army, and the German army didn't like that idea. Hitler needed to maintain the support of his professionally trained German army, more so than his rough and rowdy SA.
Exactly.
So one night in June 1934, he had Röhm and many other of his own SA officers rounded up and murdered. While he was at it, he took the opportunity to brutally settle some personal scores as well. Politicians who had disagreed with him in the past
kind of makes sense, right? SA is his personal, group of army, but it's like people trying to, play pretend, right? They were pretending to be army. There was a real German army who were trained for war, basically, right? He's not gonna say, okay, you army, you go away. SA is the new army. Okay, even if he does that, the first battle starts and they're going to lose because German army has real war experience, while the SA does not. Lots of people, the SA was already the soldiers that didn't have job, but still, there were real veterans in the real German army.
Reporters who had printed negative articles about him. One guy who did absolutely nothing, but they thought he was someone else. In some cases, even their families were murdered. In total, up to 200 people were killed in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. The army, now satisfied that they wouldn't be replaced, pledged total allegiance to their new Führer, and Hitler's control was now absolute. Life in Germany changed violently. Freedom of the press, expression, and public assembly were suspended. Jews were initially branded and their businesses boycotted. And eventually, Hitler would go on to have 6 million Jewish men, women, and children killed in concentration camps.
That's just effed up right there, right? To avoid international outrage, right? He wanted to kill all the Jewish people, but to avoid the international outrage, he just put them into the concentration camp and they starved them. And then they died. One of his, famous Nazi torturer, who was that? I'm constantly forgetting his name. Who did effed up experiments on people? Kids, right? Saw together 2 kids to, just see how it works out. And did just horrible tests with their eyeballs and things like that. Oh God, it's just horrible all around, right? They used these Jewish people as guinea pigs, basically. They didn't even see them as human, right? If it were to Hitler, he would have just, basically killed them right there at the streets. But he just wanted to, basically make sure that there is no international outrage, right? So he slowly put them into concentration camp where nobody can know what's happening there, and they slowly starve and die horribly. That was just effed up.
Hundreds of thousands of people were forced into sterilization for physical and mental imperfections. The Hitler Youth became a way to brainwash the young. Boys were trained to fight and returned home from camp violent. Girls were told their purpose was to have many pure Aryan children, and they would sometimes return from camp pregnant. When their parents were understandably horrified, their children would threaten to turn them over to the Gestapo for standing in the way of Germany's greatness. The standard greeting changed, and you could be sent to a concentration camp for not using it.
Damn, that is some next level shit, right? This is like super villain in some TV show, movie type of thing. They took the kids and brainwashed them at the point that they were so, into this Nazi mentality that even their kids, even their parents, like, what the fuck? They were so into this, Nazi national mentality that nation was first before even their parents. They're like, okay, screw that. Having kids is the best thing I can do for my country. And if my parents come into the way, I'm going to put them, hand them over to the Nazis or something. That was the next level brainwash mentality. He changed the, all the greeting signs to Heil Hitler and all the different thing. Hitler was proper mental, right? I mean, he took lots of things from Mussolini and people, and lots of other people who wrote the book. He took that way too out of the context. But yeah.
This way, it seemed like everyone was a Nazi supporter. If you dared oppose Hitler or speak out against him in any way, you also would be sent to a concentration camp. German nationalism captivated the young Adolf. Extreme ideology and anti-Semitism festered in him as a young man living a hard life on the streets. Germany's defeat in the First World War filled him with hatred and a thirst for vengeance. A political movement that treated him like a god, and hundreds of thousands looking up to him as their savior, made him a megalomaniac. And soon, his aggressive foreign policies would drag the world into a second tragic global conflict, otherwise known as...
Yeah. Yeah, so basically Hitler and his effed up childhood, basically because of his, asshole father, Hitler's mentality was already gone, right? He lost his brother, who he really loved, and the only person left was his mother, and even she died. That basically pushed him way over to the edge. Then he went to Vienna, I think, and there he heard all this, different ideologies at the time where he was really, bottom of his, mental state, right? The time where they are really susceptible to accept any kind of a effed up idea. Hitler at that point basically took all these racist ideas, right? And then just enlisted in World War I, and just his childhood anger was still inside of his pent up anger. You could see him in his all speeches and things, and he would just, basically skyrocketed from there. Treaty of Versailles was way too harsh. World War I was just fucked up, right? They call them the Great War. So, I'm not blaming the Allied forces to impose this kind of a harsh sanction, right? Anybody would be like, because of you, we lost lots of things, so you have to pay for us. So, I can't blame them for that. But that was so effed up, Treaty of Versailles, that gave a medium to Hitler to do all these things. Otherwise, World War II wouldn't have happened. Because Hitler would have been another one of the crazy guys who has some minority group of Nazi, some radical, Nazi group that, some people care about that, but majority of the Germans don't. That would have been the scenario if the Treaty of Versailles wasn't that harsh. But because it was so harsh, people couldn't even buy bread. Everybody just bought into it, and Hitler just walked himself to the top of the position and just strong-arm everybody from there on. This is why after World War II, all the sanctions and things were not that harsh. So another Hitler doesn't rise up like that. Alright people, that was Hitler Oversimplified Part 2 by the channel Oversimplified. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction day, there's a link in the description. Check out the cards or plays, check out the cards, and I'll see you next time.